Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Kev's Movie Corner. I am Kev. This week, we are talking about Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. This movie was released in 1966. It is a thriller drama, whatever, adapted from a 1962 play of the same name. The quick snippet from IMDb is a middle-aged New England socialite professor and his wife, with help of alcohol, use their young guest to fuel anguish and emotional pain toward each other over the course of a distressing night. This stars Elizabeth Taylor as Martha, Richard Burton as George Segal as Nick, and Sandy Dennis as Honey. So, 4 main characters in the play. They're actually the only 4 characters. But this movie is directed by Mike Nichols. So, this starts out with George and Martha getting home from a party, drunk. They come home drunk from a party, and they immediately start squabbling, and Martha has invited this young couple, which is Nick and Honey, over to their house after extra drinks or whatever afterwards. So, and they kind of bicker. George and Martha bicker a little bit before they get there. And when the young couple arrives, that continues. They keep drinking more and more. They continue to squabble back and forth. And Nick and Honey start with being, embarrassed, wanting to leave, and then eventually get sucked into the whole thing and kind of get entangled in this whole ordeal. At what point Martha and Honey leave the room, and when George and Nick talk for a little while by themselves, just kind of go back and forth, and then when Honey comes back, she asks George about their son, which he gets very upset about. It starts another argument between him and Martha. Martha's told Honey that their son's birthday is the next day, but that starts another big argument, and it kind of just keeps going. Eventually, Honey gets sick. She runs to the restroom. Martha kind of follows her, and Nick and George go outside and talk some more. Nick and George end up talking about how their marriages started. So Nick reveals that he married Honey because he thought she was pregnant, when he says she actually wasn't, and her dad has a lot of money. And he talks about how he's, looking to charm his way to the top of the school, because he's an associate professor as well at the same school that George is. And George tells Nick that he considers him a threat. Also tells him about a story about his a boy he grew up with who accidentally killed his mother and his father before living in a mental hospital for the rest of his life. So you've got all this kind of stuff going on. Martha is, like I said, George tells Nick that he feels like he's a threat, because Martha is actually the president of the university's daughter. So both these two men, their boss is her father. So George has talked about, that Nick is makes a comment that she would be a great place to start with his sleeping his way to the top. So eventually that kind of they all get back together in the house, in Martha and George's house, and Nick says they should leave. Honey agrees, so they end up. George insists to drive them home, even though he's drunk. They end up driving past like a bar on the side of the road, a roadhouse, and Honey wants to go dance, so they end up stopping to dance. Martha ends up dancing with Nick very sexually and making fun of George. George decides to take this moment and start humiliating everybody. So he talks about an unpublished novel of he starts rambling about an unpublished novel of this young couple who got married because of false pregnancy and money, and Nick and Honey quickly realize that that's what they're talking about them, that George is talking about them, and they run off. Martha and George have an argument in the parking lot again. Then Martha takes off and takes Nick and Honey home back to their home without George. So you've got this whole. It's a lot of dialogue. This movie is a lot of dialogue. So if you're not a big listen to what's going on and not seeing things, then you may not enjoy this movie. George arrives home to find Martha asleep in the car, or not Martha, to find Honey asleep in the car, and sees Martha and Nick basically going at it, their silhouettes going at it in the upper room, and he gets upset, he gets mad, and Honey ends up waking up, and they converse a little bit, and George comes up with an idea about their son, and he goes off, and you don't see him again for a few minutes. Then you see Martha trying to look for everyone, and her and Nick start bickering back and forth at each other. She basically tells him that he's inadequate in bed, and you kind of go through this whole ordeal. George shows back up, and they start arguing a little bit more again, and then George tells Martha that their son has died. She gets very upset, starts crying, says that he can't kill their son. And this is where the twist in this movie is. Again, it's a lot of talking, so there's not really anything that you don't see anything happen, but it's kind of a thriller. And Nick realizes that Martha and George weren't able to have children, so they had come up with an imaginary son to fill that void. But their rule was neither one would talk about it to anybody else. And since she did, he killed her off, or killed him off. Nick and Honey leave at this point. It's right about morning. You can see the sun rising in the windows at the house. But Nick and Honey leave. George and Martha are left alone. George starts singing "Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?" And Martha responds, "I am." And then it ends, and that's it. It's a kind of sad and it's kind of a sad movie. The dialogue is very intense. So it's not, it can be difficult to follow along with sometimes, which I noticed, but it is a very intense dialogue. So the fact that there's nothing like visual happening most of the time, it still is a pretty intense movie. So, again, this is based on a film from 1962, or not a film, a play from 1962. The film is almost entirely the same. There's a couple differences. They don't in the play. They everything takes place in the house, inside the house, not outside the house. The movie has a scene outside the house, a scene at the roadhouse, and a scene in the car. The other one, everything takes place inside the house. Um, there's no other characters in the other one, so you don't have in this one. In the movie you have the roadhouse owner and his wife, or his wife who is like serving drinks there. So they only he only has like one line, and then she doesn't say a thing. So they're not major players in this, obviously, either. They're not even credited in the film. So um, they actually use the screenplay or the original play as the screenplay for this movie, and just kind of toned down the language, because apparently the language is worse in the play than in this movie, which, I mean, that makes sense for something that's being published to go about in the 1960s. So um, this is the first movie since 1931 to be nominated for every Academy Award in which it was eligible, which was all the acting categories: Best Picture, Best Screenplay, and Best Director. Just a few of those. Every member of the cast won an Academy Award nomination. So every person credited, so all four of them. That would be Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor, George Segal, and Sandy Dennis. The play actually was very popular as well, in the same respects. In 1963, it won a Tony for Best Play, and it won the New York Drama Critics Circle Award for Best Play in 1962 and 63. So that's a couple interesting facts about it. Another thing that I thought was interesting was Elizabeth Taylor, to play like a 50 middle aged woman in this, put on like 30 pounds, which is interesting. And it also, I thought this was funny. Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, they're both big names at the time, but it was hard to get them on set to actually film anything, because they both had in their contracts that they didn't start working, or they didn't have to be on set until 10 a.m. By the time they were done with makeup, it was lunchtime, and then they would go off and have cocktails and then come back sometime later in the afternoon, and then start filming. So you just, sure, whatever. I guess the cocktail lunches made them kind of more of the drunk that they portrayed in the film as well. So I, as far as my thought on this film, I don't think it's for everybody. You do have to pay attention, because there's a lot of dialogue. It's a very, very, very dialogue heavy movie. It's just over 2 hours. The play is what I was looking at. It takes about 3 hours with 2 intermissions. So the movie's it's 2 hours and 9 minutes, I think is what it says. So it is rather long for such a film that really doesn't have anything visually happening. But I did think it was interesting. I don't know that I would ever watch it again, personally. But I did think it was an interesting story and interesting to what's going on. I think if you like thrillers, it's not necessarily, well, it's where I looked, it said it was a thriller. I don't know if I would even consider it a thriller, because again, there's not a whole lot that happens. There's even the twist in the movie isn't really that crazy. It's surprising, but it's not really that crazy. So it's very drama. It's if you like a drama, I guess. Um, if you like a soap opera, this is probably a good movie for you. That's what I would say. If you like a soap opera, this is a great movie for you because from what I have seen of soap operas, which isn't a lot, I will say that. Sorry, people who like soap operas, but if you like a soap opera, from what I have seen of soap opera, this is very much like that, just better acting. Sorry again, but we're going up against, you know, Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. So I don't know what to tell you about that. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. Next week we are watching Unforgiven from 1992. That's a newer one. We haven't seen a newish movie in a while. So, I mean, it's almost as old as I am, but newer than a lot of these other ones in 1966. So, hope you guys enjoyed this. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and I will talk to you guys next week.